Well, hello, welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located at. I'm seeing some really awesome cities in the chat box. We got a lot of representations from all over the US here. Welcome to everybody. My name is Andrew Gonzalez, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. We have Ramona here who will introduce herself in just 1 second. Super excited to have Ramona here talk about really something that really is just woven into a lot of us. Unfortunately, I think she has such a great insight, and she spent time really just learning about this, and she has such great insight, and I'm so excited for everybody to hear from her. A couple of things before we jump in, just friendly reminders here. So we have a chat box, for a reason. So we really want to engage with everybody here on the call, really make it a safe space for others. We understand imposter syndrome can really be a discussion that varies from person to person. And this really is a safe space to have a conversation amongst our community at large. So feel free to engage. Feel free when you agree with something, let people know. If something stands out, let us know. I will be moderating your chat box during the entire presentation. So we really want to hear from you. On that note as well, if you have questions, Ramona is going to save some time at the end. So if you have any questions at all during the discussion, feel free to let us know as well. I'll be recording some of the questions as well so we can circle back to those. And then lastly, you should see 3 screens on your little event page. You have my face, Ramona's face, and then the presentation. If you would like to zoom in into the presentation or into either of us, feel free to double click on that specific box and it should open it up for you. So if you want to see the presentation a little bit larger, you can do that. Otherwise, if anything comes up, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat box as I moderate them through the call. So we're going to open it up with a question. And this is a question that we really want to just think about for 1 second. And, with the whole summit happening, everybody's learning so much. And I'm sure everyone is so stimulated and you're so engaged. And for this question, just take a moment to step outside of that for 1 moment and really just think about that. But the question is, have you ever disagreed with others in the room, but you've held back because you believe there is something that they know that you don't? Now I'll repeat that 1 more time. Have you ever disagreed with others in the room, but have held back because you believe that there is something that they know that you don't? Do you feel that feeling? I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Right, I'm holding my hand up high for that one. It's a feeling that you feel from inside. You're unsure, you're a little unsteady, and you can't really put your finger on the pulse of what am I feeling? What do I say? What's next? We're going to talk about that feeling a little bit in 1 second. So think about that. Let that carry you through the discussion. Without further ado, I'll pass it on over to our speaker, Ramona.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. Really excited to be here to talk to you about this feeling. And the feeling that we are sharing is imposter syndrome. And so what we're going to talk about today is really how to work through claiming space, taking up space to really challenge that experience when that shows up for you. And so what we're going to start with today is first level setting, making sure that everyone has the same shared understanding of what imposter syndrome is, and then talk through how it happens, and then who it affects. And then from there, work through, what are some other problems that are associated with imposter syndrome? And finally, the meat of this, right? It's what can you do about it? How do I challenge it? How do I claim space? And we'll close out the day with a value reflection exercise. We want to really just really tie it up and really give you some actionable advice to move forward after today. So we'll start with first, level setting. What is imposter syndrome? And so what I have here on the screen is really an illustration of what that can look like, right? So imposter syndrome is defined as the feeling that you get when you feel like there are things that other people know that you don't, It can be a really overwhelming sense of self-doubt and lack of confidence in your success. And it'll show up at times when you think that there's this, there's all this knowledge that other people know. So you have here, it's what you have here on the left is what you might think it, like what you're thinking, right? What your feelings are. You think there's this wealth of knowledge that other people have. And compared to what you know, you think it's, it's a lot more than what you might know. And when in reality, it's actually very similar. Like what you know, you have a wealth of knowledge, you have a wealth of experience, and that is comparable to what others know. And so, so it's really like a distinction, a delineation of what is the fact, right? What do the facts say versus what are these feelings that I am experiencing? And it's also like when you think of imposter syndrome, it's the idea that you might be underqualified in some way, and it can show up in a lot of ways, like at work, at home, in any kind of like business environment. And I think that it's one thing that makes it really relevant to our community here is the fact that it can be perpetuated by like others' feelings about like diversity hires, right? There's something about it that's out of our control. And then also like unconscious biases. So you've got the conscious ones, the really overt ones, but then you've got these unconscious biases that'll show up and will really have you question it more. And then also on top of that, anytime that you hear from a well-meaning family member who says something to the effect of, you're so lucky to have had the opportunities that you've had. And all of that can really just perpetuate it. All of that can make it, can be triggers for imposter syndrome. And so we'll walk through a little bit more about like how it shows up and who it affects. And so here we have a quote from the Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So speaking of situations that might be triggering to people, right? No one knows this better than her. And so her quote here is that when you come from a poor working class background, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you have an immigrant story, if you're first generation, if you're always, you are always haunted by imposter syndrome, like this idea that you got here by accident. So how does that resonate with you?
It's hitting home for a lot of us. I just threw in there right now that these feelings feel familiar, the sound of we're so lucky to be here all the time. Absolutely, the feels.
Yeah.
Pretty familiar emotions for us.
And so from that, I want you to, now we're going to explore like how it happens, who it affects, right? And it's actually really, really common. So research has shown that up to 70% of people have experienced imposter syndrome at some point. Very common, not something that you're sitting around a room, you think about 7 out of 10 of those people have experienced this, maybe experiencing at the time that you are. It really puts a figure to it, a visual, right, to how common this is. It's huge. It happens to a lot of us. And so it's unfortunately, I think of this kind of like as the dark side of success, right? That it can affect every successful person. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an example of that, right? It can affect elected officials, athletes, doctors. Doctors, usually you assume, when you go see a doctor, like they've got it all figured out and they know it, like they just have like they have such a wealth of knowledge, but it can affect all of us. Like it can affect even these people who have all of this skill, all of this knowledge, and it also can affect many of us. And so one thing, in addition to what I shared earlier, it's especially prevalent in underrepresented communities. And then also what doesn't help is that the more advanced we get in our careers, the fewer and fewer people that we see that are like us. And that can be really tough. And so the next thing is, so clearly there's a problem, right? So we're going to talk through what some of the other associated problems might be. And it's that imposter syndrome can lead to, first, taking fewer risks, right? How many of you have questioned that before? Like, I'm not sure I meet the criteria for this promotion, or I don't know, like you overthink it. Or even when it comes to even just suggesting an idea, you have a really great idea, but you second guess yourself. This doubt creeps in and you don't share it. And that's not like that. The problem with that is that it doesn't just affect you, that can affect others, right? Others that can benefit from you being promoted, others that would benefit from you sharing that idea. And then procrastination. So I've been there, right? I am a chronic and recovering overthinker, a perfectionist, right? Something that happens with procrastination often is that you're just waiting because you feel like it needs to be perfect and it's not quite there yet. And then before you know it, your deadline is approached and you're running out of time. And so it's not a good feeling, and it's definitely not productive. And so there's definitely what we see here is reasons why we should work on how to challenge imposter syndrome. And then also when it comes to confidence. So essentially what we're going to talk about later is how imposter syndrome is very much a confidence. It's a problem with confidence. It's a skill. It's an opportunity to develop the skill of confidence. You have to think of confidence as a skill to be developed. And so if you can't take credit for the good work that you've done, for the successes that you've had, it's also difficult to take any kind of constructive feedback, right? It means that you may internalize and focus on the things that you don't know, as opposed to just working through it and moving forward. And so that's another one of those problems with imposter syndrome. And the next one is stress. I think that all of this really leads up and trickles into stress, right? In that it'll take this unnecessary toll on your health, and emphasis on unnecessary. This is totally something that we can work through. This is totally something that we can address. And so we're going to work through that today on like, how do we make sure that we can address these problems with imposter syndrome in a really productive way. And yeah, stress is reason enough to want to figure this out. Okay, so I want to start with some of the bad advice I've heard out there before we get into the good stuff, right? So what we've heard a lot, I'm sure you've heard several times over the course of your career, is fake it till you make it. And while this is very well-meaning advice, what I don't like about it is that it's grounded in like you coming across as a fraud, right? It's saying be a fraud, which is the entire problem with imposter syndrome, to fix it. And what really needs to happen is you need to work on confidence. And I think that with fake it till you make it, problem with that is that if you address it through a behavior that makes you feel like a fraud, it's going to work against you. Ultimately, it's going to work against you. The first time you're challenged, the first mistake you make, the first failure, you're going to internalize that. It's going to make you take a few steps back for every step that you've taken forward. So the real work has to come in developing confidence as a skill and really anchor that in what your accomplishments are. And if you don't know those, that's what we're going to get into, but absolutely, like, let's work through that, because you have to be able to like work through that and build from there, build from what your accomplishments are, build from your strengths. And then the other part is that one thing that I've heard a lot over time, anytime that imposter syndrome comes up, you hear defeat imposter syndrome, right? And the problem I find with that is that it implies that it can be beat. It implies that it can go away. It implies that it's not going to be there anymore. And I think that that is unrealistic. I think that it's, you can definitely work on minimizing it. You can work on making it far less prevalent in your life. You can work on proactively addressing anything and getting ahead of those triggers, that things that will make the imposter syndrome show up. But I think that it's really hard to believe that you can just get rid of it altogether. And that expectation actually sets us up to fail. It sets us up with unreasonable expectations. So the next part here, so it's like, well, if I shouldn't do that, like, what do I do then, right? Where do I begin? And the first step is to understand and deal with it as a systemic issue. I can't stress this part enough. What that means is that there are triggers that will happen. There are things that will happen in your environment that are going to make you question. They're going to make you question everything, and they're going to make you question your skill. They're going to make you question your ability. They're going to make you question your knowledge. And it's really just knowing how to cope with it, how to deal with it, how to challenge it that'll really get you through this. And then the second part is to, like I mentioned earlier, to recognize it, so know when it shows up. You know, if you need to pause, like monitor your breaths, take a look, like basically take a look inside, acknowledge that you're feeling uncomfortable and what is driving that feeling of discomfort. What some people do is they will write things down that will help to understand what their triggers are, what's really like, what is starting this for you? What, you know, by identifying your triggers, you know how to stop it in its tracks each time that it begins to happen, and challenge it and stop the cycle from continuing. The third part is to share your feelings with someone you trust. And that is huge. That, I think that I can safely say that I've probably been dealing with imposter syndrome since I shared this with Andrew during one of the times that we prepared, but I've been dealing with it, I'm pretty sure, since I was in kindergarten, when I didn't know how to speak English. And I realized everyone there knew English but me. And yeah, it's so big. And so it's something that I've been dealing with my entire life, just about. And what's really, really helped is to share that with someone and to connect around it. And then you realize there are 70% of people out there that have experienced it, right? You realize that you have something, often you realize you have something in common. Or the person that you share your feelings with will challenge you about why you feel that way. So it's just, I think that is such a critical component of this. And shout out to my work wife, Alex, who's tuning in today. She is someone that I'm able to share these feelings with all the time. And I think that it's so helpful to have that support. Next is to accept external validation. And what does that mean? Right? That means that if someone says you did a good job at something, if someone tells you thank you, don't back up, don't walk it back, don't minimize what you've done. Don't start to explain it. Don't say it was nothing. Just stop and say thank you. If it's uncomfortable, that's good. That means you're making progress, right? You have to just allow that to happen in order to start to really own and accept what has made you successful, what you've done that's been really great.
I'm seeing a lot of agreement in the chat box. For everyone who's agreeing to that one, know that when I first met with Ramona, put that out in front of me, I said, what? Like, that's a thing? I thought it was, I didn't even think that I was doing that, but it absolutely is. It's so hard to take compliments sometimes and think about the correlation of that and feeling fortunate and blessed to be where we are at. We always connect those two and we feel like it's hard to accept that.
Yeah.
Facts.
Thanks, Andrew. And then the last one here, and I think that this one is really, really important. It's related to all the others, but I really want to make sure to call that out, is to separate feeling from fact. So if you think about that visual at the beginning of our presentation, right? What I think others know versus what I know versus the reality, which is we each bring something to the table. The first one is reflective of your feelings if you are dealing with imposter syndrome. The second is fact. And one of the exercises that I've done before is actually writing down, some of the, like when you're working on your resume, for example, which you should always be on top of, resumes, even like one thing that one word of advice I always give anyone that I'm coaching is to also write down every time you've accomplished something at work, every time you've run a project or a program or anything like that. And I think that by doing that, not only are you prepared when it comes to performance review time, not only are you prepared for when you have to update your resume, you're also helping yourself clearly see all of the work that you've done and own that you are capable of doing it. And so that is one way that you can separate those feelings from fact. Because how is it that I am incapable, or how is it that I am, I don't know what I'm doing if I've actually done A, B, C, D, E, and F? Like, no, I'm incredible. Like, I can do these things. And the next part is to own and accept your success, but while understanding and accepting and owning what you have yet to learn, right? So when, I think it's twofold. You have to, one, own what makes you so great, own those strengths, own your capabilities, own all of that, but then also embrace what you don't know yet. And keyword yet, right? Because if it's something that interests you, if it's something that's relevant, you'll learn it, just like you did all the other things that you got to, that you have for where you are now. And so I think that is really important, is to just be okay with not knowing everything. Recovering perfectionist here, it's really hard to do that. But it is really, really important. And it's okay to not be the person that knows it all, that can help everyone with everything. You just have to, it's okay to be both. You can be both. You can be this incredible person that's got all of these strengths and still have a long way to go for where you want to be. So a little bit more about like claiming space or taking up space. And here are a couple ways where a couple typical ways where imposter syndrome will show up. It'll show up sometimes as someone being the helper or the go-to for problem solving. If you often find yourself in that situation, and it's important to accept help. So first, accept that you don't know everything, right? You may not have all the answers, and that's okay. Don't overwork yourself. Don't work the extra hours unnecessarily, consistently. That's going to burn you out. Be okay with not knowing it all. Be okay with delegating. Be okay with accepting help. And then also we have a behind the scenes leader. So that's someone who has a lot of responsibility, a lot of ownership, a lot of initiative, but is not a visible lead. And I think that it's really important there that you clearly and visibly lead and own your contributions. So that means, really affirmative decision making, not backpedaling when someone disagrees or anything like that. If you know what you're talking about, then know it, and own it, right? And then also present your work instead of allowing, or instead of saying, so-and-so can do it because I don't know, it's for whatever reason. Be confident with presenting it. Not that you have to do it every time, but just be confident, build that confidence with doing it. Maybe it's a little bit at a time, but that's what it's going to take, because all of this work is work. Anytime that it comes to working on building your confidence, it's much easier said than done. It's going to take time. So it's might mean that you practice or you work on decision making at one point, and that is your focus for the course of 2 weeks even. Or it might mean that the next time that you have the opportunity to present your work, maybe internally for a project, then you do that, and then you can expand from there. So it's okay to take steps.
And it definitely takes practice, right? Owning your contributions is something that, like, you hear, and it takes practice. Like you said, like Ramona, I love what you said about writing down all your accomplishments. Like, that really helps you revisit your contributions and really helps you when it comes time to speak on the things that you have given and the things that you have succeeded in as well. So I think those two go so well hand in hand together.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so in addition to what we can do for ourselves, there are things that we can do for each other. With this being so like rampant, or like affecting so many of us, it's one way that we can support each other, because this is cyclical. There are, anytime that you take steps forward, it'll help others support you in doing that. And we can do the same for each other, right? So to start, if someone shares a really good idea in a meeting, like, echo it and give that person credit and say, that's a great idea for reasons A, B, C, and D. So-and-so, this is, let's move forward in this way. But really just that'll help support each other with developing this confidence that's needed to challenge imposter syndrome. And then also celebrating each other's wins. So I think that this actually is a lot like giving people really specific feedback, right? So you celebrate the wins, because we often feel so uncomfortable with doing it ourselves. Celebrate each other's wins, but then you by emphasizing the time, the energy, the effort spent working on that project, you're identifying and giving the person credit for everything that they've done to get there. So it didn't happen by chance. It was not luck. It was their time. It was their energy. It was their effort. It was their expertise. It was their skill, right? And by doing that for each other, we're supporting each other in developing this and ensuring that we are able to take the space that we have worked so hard to claim, right? We have worked really hard to get where we are. And so doing this will help with that. So now, I don't know, Andrew, if you had anything to add before we get into like a value. I want to do a values exercise to really just drive home this message that we've been sharing in today's session.
No, I mean, you've brought up such great points, and Ramona, I have questions already for you that maybe we can circle back to at the end with just your advice. I think all of this so insightful. I think owning contributions, and something that really stood out to me. I don't know if others on this video chat also felt the same way, but you think about being comfortable with everything that you don't know. I think when you said that to me a couple of days ago, I really had to step back in that, because we often feel like we're going to expose ourselves, right? We feel this like, I can't tell others that I'm not the marketing professional, or I'm not the recruiting professional, or I don't know every tech stack. And that's a scary feeling. And I think if you really lean into that a little bit, just like you recommended, and just in feeling that it's okay not to know these, and maybe even make a list of those things you want to learn, that speaks volumes and really helps you with that. So I also think this values exercise you're going to put on us right now is a really good way of thinking about how we got to where we're at.
Thanks. Okay, so to do this, I want everyone to think of a value. So think of something that you value, something that's really important to you. An example of that could be your family, learning, even wealth. Like, if your value is to make money, I respect that. So it's whatever it is that you value. And you may have a few that come to mind. and that's okay. Just for the purpose of this exercise, I want you to think of one, and we'll give you a couple seconds to think through that. All right. So now I want you to think of some of the decisions that you've made, some of the choices that you've had during the course of your career. And I want you to think about and consider, how has this value been reflected in those choices? Because you chose this. You did this for yourself. It's not by luck. It's not by chance. Though if you feel that way at all, it's great that you are acknowledging the help, any kind of help that you've received, but really you've done this. Because by just as easily by luck or by chance, you could end up in a very different place, right? And so right now I want you to think of, how has that value been reflected in choices that you have made in your career? And we'll give everyone a minute to think, or about a minute to think through that.
I'm seeing a lot of similarity too in the chat. If you feel comfortable dropping those values in the chat, please do. But I'm seeing family, I'm seeing helping other communities.
Yeah, while you think through that, I'm happy to share mine. One of my, greatest values, I think, is that I really value being of service to others. And at first, it was really directly applied to my work. I have a background in social work and behavior therapy. And so it was really relevant. It was how I approach my work every day, right? But since then, I've worked I now work in human resources and coaching, and it's now it shows up in a different way. Now I've made choices to not just get me to the career that I have now, but all the way from California to New York. And they were very, at times they felt really risky. Things could have gone very differently, but I took those risks because I had the confidence that doing so would get me here. And so for you all, what are some of those choices that you've made, and how is that value showing up?
So many great examples. I don't want to do on the spot, Jeffrey, but I love yours. He mentioned family, and he mentioned, making the decision to finish his education and pursuing his professional development, knowing he was going to be a father.
Amazing. Now I'm aware of the time, Andrew. Is there, do you think there's an opportunity for anyone to even share on camera?
Yeah, I think we can have maybe a couple minutes if somebody feels comfortable, or if anybody wants to come on and share. No pressure, but again, we want to make this a space for everyone. So if you see a button on the main event page or the main page you're at right now, there's a button that says request to share video or audio. And if anyone feels comfortable, I should get a notification when someone does that. Maybe not, and that's okay.
Okay, that's perfectly okay.
If you're more comfortable in the chat, definitely feel free to drop it in. I'm seeing a lot of great stuff and a lot of agreements. And yes, it's okay if we're all too shy. It's a hard subject, and you may have to take some time to think about it.
Absolutely. And so the reason I asked this question is essentially because really want to drive home the message that you have made those choices that are why you are where you are now. It was you did it, and your perspective is valuable. So if you ever question whether or not you should share that insight, just know, like, for example, with myself, there have been several times over the course of my career where I held back, and I wish I hadn't, because once like later when I reflected on it, I realized there was something I knew that others didn't, and it would have helped us, move forward in a different way. And then the other part is, if you don't know it all, it's okay. That's how you really own it. That's how you show up authentically. That's how you show up vulnerably. And that's how you essentially claim your space. That's how you take up space, is by really truly being yourself. So I have some resources here that I'd be happy to share with everyone. One of them is an Instagram account that I found with Dr. Orbe Austin, actually a husband and wife duo, but they have some really great content around imposter syndrome and really actionable insights and advice. And another thing that I'd like to share with everyone is a podcast called How I Built This with Guy Raz. It's an incredible podcast about building businesses. So you have, some of my favorites are the story about Slack, Instagram, and what was another one? There was another one, Spanx, randomly. But what I like about these stories is that they share all of their failures, all of the struggles that they ran into as they were building their businesses. And it really helps you see that that's what it takes to succeed. And there are a number of examples in there about how at any point someone could have allowed that feeling of being a fraud or being an imposter to affect them. They could have allowed that to be a barrier to their success, and we wouldn't know them for what we know them for today. And then if you know me, you know I love Brene Brown. So I encourage everyone to check out her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability. It's very relevant to this work. That's what it means to be vulnerable. That's what it, to develop your confidence and to really challenge imposter syndrome means that you are, it means that you're being vulnerable. And, often she shares, I think it's in this TED Talk, but I can't remember. What she shares is that to be vulnerable is to be, often when we hear the word vulnerability, we will connect it to like someone being like to some kind of weakness, right? When you have like this activity where you connect the words, you think of vulnerable and you think of weakness. But when we talked about it, or when it was talked about with other people, what we saw and what you hear is that vulnerability is really essentially a strength. And so that's the way that we need to think of vulnerability. And then a couple of books here. I love to read, and I couldn't pick just one. So the first book that I selected here is My Beloved World by Sonia Sotomayor. It's just I read it twice. It's a memoir. It tells you about it starts with her childhood and leads up through college, and all of these phases where she was challenged, on her skill or her knowledge, and how she had to really, that confidence really had to come from within. She really had to develop this confidence from within, because there wasn't a lot of, out there in the world that was supporting her in that. And so I love this book. I think it's a fast read, even though it's pretty thick. And I think it's because there's so many nuggets of wisdom there. And then another one that I'd like to share. This one is more of like in the, business self-help, is The Likability Trap. And this one is by Alicia Menendez, and she is an MSNBC anchor. And she just goes into how it's particularly written for women like her and like myself, where you fall into this trap of wanting to be likable. And instead, what we need to focus on is being respected. And how do we do that? And I think that imposter syndrome comes up there a lot. So even though I think that her target audience was women, I really recommend that everyone read it. I think there's so much to be gained from that. And then because I love Brene Brown, here's a quote that I'd like to share with everyone. And that is that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It's the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path to really get us there, essentially. And to build confidence, to be okay with not knowing everything, to be okay with not being perfect is incredibly vulnerable. And just know that you have our support, and you have the support of everyone in this session, in the sense that we get that it's work. We get that it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be essentially, when you're able to challenge imposter syndrome, you're doing it one step at a time, one interaction at a time. And so, you can do it though. It's not easy, but you can do it. And so now we'd like to open up the floor for any questions.
We have a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, we can take probably like 2 or 3 of them. And this could be anything that Ramona covered, or anything that you feel about imposter syndrome that you may want to refer to Ramona for. All, by the way, Ramona, all just nuggets of wisdom. You dropped it on us, and this is all great. A lot of thank yous in the chat right now. And
thank you.
Taking away some great stuff from this. I guess a question for you, Ramona, coming in from Fatima, was when did you start realizing that imposter syndrome was affecting your life?
I would say it was probably at some point in college. It was my first time. Well, I didn't know the name for it until then. But I definitely, like I said earlier, I definitely started to feel that. I didn't put a name to the feeling, even as far back as kindergarten. I remember having to take a test for English and just being paralyzed by the fear of not getting it right. And I feel like that really has shaped me in a lot of ways, and in a lot of positive ways. I think that it's why I am where I am today. I've always anything I didn't know, I worked really hard to learn it. So I would say college was probably around the first time that I was able to put a name to it, and then recognize and acknowledge and appreciate that other people were experiencing it.
Absolutely. And I have a question for you, actually, which is also just around imposter syndrome in the workplace. Is there any advice that you would give to somebody who maybe wants to bring up imposter syndrome to maybe their manager even, or people that don't always resemble with it? What kind of advice would you give someone when talking about such a subject in like a corporate space, for example?
Yeah, I can see that being really tough. I think that essentially it just starts with, I think it all circles back to feedback. And if a team is practicing giving really specific, really actionable feedback, I think you can frame it up around feedback. You start with feedback. You accept, honestly, that's where it really comes down, what it comes down to. Because if you're sharing feedback, right, you're sharing like what it was that happened, what you did well, what the impact was, you're able to really focus on like what those skills are as opposed to anything that's internalized. So it starts there at the very least.
Awesome. Well, I know we're nearing time here. I'm seeing a couple of questions that we have still in our chat, but we absolutely want to take the moment to connect with everyone. So Ramona, if you're comfortable with it, I encourage everyone to reach out, connect with us both on LinkedIn. Ramona, thank you so much for putting this together, for your time, for your wisdom. This is all just incredible stuff, and I've learned so much from you, and just already in the past couple of weeks, I'm sure everyone will have some things to take away as well. So a huge thank you to you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning on in. If there are other sessions you're interested in, feel free to go back into the sessions section of Hopin and check out the next session starting at 12:30. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, and thank you, Ramona.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you so much. And thank you, Andrew. This was great.
Thanks,
Let's
everybody.
talk more about it. Find us on LinkedIn.
Yes. Bye, everybody.
All right, bye.